I worked the closing shift alone at a gas station during college. Looking back on it, it's definitely not the best place to have a teenage girl alone all night, especially since we were the first gas station off the interstate exit. One night, my little sister stopped in to visit. She was probably 17 at the time. As we stood there talking, we noticed 4 raggedy, dirty-looking men get out of this really beat-up car and start walking around the parking lot. One of them walked in and looked at me and my sister quickly, then looked away and acted very interested in the lottery machine that was beside the door. He stood at the machine for a few seconds, fidgeting around, then walked out. He stood right beside the newspaper dispenser, just outside our door, and you could periodically see him gesturing to the other 3 men who had gotten back into the car and kept moving around the lot. We obviously noticed the strange behavior and were pretty nervous. She ended up staying with me for over an hour until we thought they had left and had been gone for a while. I walked to the door with her as she walked out and watched her get into her car. As soon as she put her car in reverse, I saw headlights come on from a dark corner of the parking lot that you couldn't see from the inside of the store. It turned out that they had never left. They pulled right back in, completely unseen, and backing into an out-of-the-way parking spot and turned off all their headlights. As my sister's car pulled up to the highway to turn out of the parking lot, they pulled up right behind her and turned onto the road when she did. I called the police and had them waiting at my sister's apartment when she arrived. This was before cell phones were even common, around 2004, so I couldn't call and warn her. Fortunately, nothing happened to her, but when I talked to her again, she told me that she did notice someone behind her the whole drive home. It makes me sick to think about what could have happened had I not walked to the door with her that night and noticed the car hiding in the shadows. I worked the night shift at a gas station. At the time, I had worked from 9 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. About an hour before I was about to leave, a man and a woman walk in. I was in the cooler stocking the fridges and heard the bell ring. I go out of the cooler doors and greet them. They stand eerily quiet in front of the door, not making a sound before their faces light up and they greet me back. It's a little odd, but some people are like that. I go behind the counter and they make small talk about our slushies. I'm bored and tired, so I don't mind the talk. I should say now that the pair were quite literally of 2 different planets, or at least it seemed so. The woman was dressed in practically rags. She had a frayed coat, cut gloves, a shawl with holes in it, and her hair was short but completely matted and looked like straw. However, the man was tall, well-built, dressed in fancier clothing, and his shoes were name brand. He had a gold watch and a diamond ring on. His hair was neatly trimmed and his beard was starting to grow back. Overall, a very neat-looking man. They were an odd pair, but I've seen more weird pairs of people in the past. They get to the counter, and the woman is shifting uncontrollably, but always flashes a wide smile. The man set the 2 slushies down, and I ring them up. He goes to grab cash, but realizes he doesn't have any, and instead pulls out a credit card. It declines 9 times. I look down at the counter while I wait for him to try again. I felt sick. His hands were riddled with small cuts with glass buried in them, and the blood trailed up and down his arms and all over the palm of his hands. All the cuts were still bleeding. I feel eyes on me, and I look up at him. He's staring at me with the most horrid stare, as if he were one move away from attacking me. I feel dizzy thinking about that night, but instead of attacking me, he just laughed and turned away, saying he doesn't have the money on him to pay for the slushies. He goes to leave the building, and the woman follows him happily, complaining about not getting slushies. But then I see it. She has blood on her face under her eye, and she winked at me before she left. I was very scared at this point. I was so scared I couldn't do anything except bolt out of the door to get the license plate of the car, but sadly, they were already on the highway. I inspected the store for anything stolen, but instead, I found blood droplets all over the store. I was disgusted and scared. I worried if they'd come back now that I'd seen their condition. I worried about what if they had just killed someone, or got into a hit and run, or were involved in some accident. My manager had walked in as I was panicking and told me not to worry and he'd handle it. I didn't know anything else of what became of that night. Still though, very spooky. I literally thought I was about to be murdered. I was working the night shift as a forklift driver at a fairly large DIY store with a couple of adjoining warehouses. Part of the job involved unloading delivery trucks and storing stuff in an allocated warehouse. One night, we were running short on space. I was asked to go check out if the adjoining warehouse was set up for storage overflow. I drove down to the next building because it was quicker than walking and drove inside the large empty building. The forklift stopped as if I hit an EMP or something. Absolutely no electronics, a sudden stop, no warning lights, no power down, and suddenly no headlights. I sat in the cabin, a little nervously, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dark and retrying the ignition. It didn't start up, but slowly, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. Across the building, I could see, or I thought I could see, human shapes moving around. They were at the opposite end, so even further away from the main building that I had been in. I drove the forklift, so I didn't think these could be coworkers who had run down and entered the building some other way to prank me. I kept trying the key, getting more nervous, and the shapes I thought I could see started to cross the large open space and moving towards me. I didn't think they could be thieves, there was nothing in the building and nothing worth stealing, but the thought occurred to me that they could be junkies finding an out-of-the-way place to shoot up their heroin. I turned the keys more and more desperately and made the mental decision that if they reached a certain spot I would just abandon the forklift and run back to the main building. Anyway, suddenly the machine thumped into life and the headlights and power came back on. There was nothing in the building, no other people. I was absolutely shocked because I was convinced that there was more than one person approaching me and within 20 meters of my forklift. But to my surprise, there was not a soul in that warehouse. I drove out of there, locked up, and thought about how this could have been some sort of paranormal experience or just my mind playing tricks on me. I worked night shift at a gas station in the bad end of a small town. A couple of notes about myself before we began. I keep my hair short as it's easier to maintain with my OCD, and I have large shoulders and a general football player build for a woman. My coworker, however, was little with long blonde hair and a pretty face. Most of the folks who came in were fine, or weird but harmless. There were the occasional inconsiderate people, the drunks and tweakers, but hey, what can you do about that? This time, it was a guy in a camper who was the problem. Whenever I worked with my coworker, it would always be fun. We would always laugh it up and just make the time go by as fast as we could. The camper guy comes in one night and starts talking with her. I'm stocking the cigarettes right behind the register, and she's 5 feet away at the deli counter. He seems harmless enough at first, but I'm suspicious of everyone, so I'm keeping an eye on things. The guy starts with some small talk, how's the weather, how busy we're, but then he starts asking about her and her infant daughter. He starts taking slow steps toward the open end of the deli counter. My coworker is trying to be nice and back away toward the cooler entrance, but you definitely can tell she's ready to go if he lunges at her. By the time I notice and step down from the register, he's close enough that she's backed against the hand washing sink. All 6 feet of me is now stuck to the side of my little coworker, and the guy takes a step back. He gets some diesel for his camper and leaves, but it doesn't stop there. He comes in whenever we two specifically are working. We notice the pattern immediately, try to get him to leave by being dismissive, but he asks my coworker more and more personal questions. Who's her new boyfriend? Where does she have tattoos? How close does she live? To defuse the situation, I would always send her to the cooler just to check on something randomly to get away from him. He'd buy his diesel and go sit in his camper near the diesel pumps where there was no street lights. A few nights he hadn't left before we closed up, so I followed my coworker in my car as she walked home. On the next shift we had together, it escalated to him confronting her on her smoke break and cornering her in the back of the building by the dumpster. If our maintenance guy hadn't been there that night, I might have been filing a police report. Luckily, we got him on security camera, but what can we do when he doesn't come back to the station after that? I left the job a few months after that. The last I heard of my coworker is that she has a new job and engaged to her then boyfriend, which is great for her. I'm just glad that nothing ended up happening to her or me, but I would never work at a gas station ever again.